She lived in a small apartment on the edge of the city, a place where the sounds of traffic mixed with the faint hum of her old piano. Music had always been her refuge, a quiet place where she could forget the harshness of the world outside. Every morning, she woke up before the sun, brewed a cup of tea, and sat by the window, letting her fingers dance over the keys. It was not for anyone else, only for her. She had learned early that the world rarely paid attention to people like her. Her life had been simple, but full of struggles. Her family had always encouraged practical work over dreams. She had tried different jobs to make ends meet, from working at a small bakery to helping in a local bookstore. She did not complain. She just accepted that life was not always about chasing passion. But music had a way of sneaking back in, a persistent reminder that she had something to say, even if the world did not listen. One afternoon, a letter arrived at her apartment. The envelope was heavy, cream-colored, and smelled faintly of old paper. She held it in her hands, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and fear. It was an invitation to perform at an event she had only ever seen in magazines. The kind of event where people wore elegant clothes, sipped expensive drinks, and spoke with authority that came from wealth and influence. Her heart raced. She read the letter again and again, making sure she had not misunderstood. Yes, it was her name, written clearly, inviting her to perform. She felt a rush of excitement, but it was immediately followed by doubt. Was this a mistake? Would anyone even care about her music? The room was larger than she had imagined. High ceilings, chandeliers that glimmered like captured stars, and polished wooden floors made everything shine in a way that made her feel both awe and unease. People walked around gracefully, glasses in hand, laughing lightly or speaking softly. Their laughter was polite, refined, and carefully measured, as if the sound of real life would be a mistake in this space. She moved slowly, taking it all in, trying to feel comfortable in a world so far from hers. Every step she took reminded her of the letter that had brought her here and the courage it had taken to say yes. She felt the eyes of the elite on her as she walked. At first, she ignored them, focusing on her breathing and keeping her step steady. But she could not escape the polite smiles, the quick glances, and the subtle gestures of evaluation. People nodded politely when she passed, murmuring greetings that sounded rehearsed. She had faced doubt before, but this was different. This was a room filled with people who had power, influence, and money, and they had seen and experienced so much. They were polite, but the air was heavy with judgment. She felt every bit of it. She tried to remind herself why she was here. It was not for them to accept her, not for them to recognize her talent. It was for her music to speak, to fill the space with the emotions she had carried for years. Still, the weight of their polite but distant attention made her heart pound. She found a quiet corner near the stage, observing the room. The elite mingled, their conversations flowing like a river she could not cross. She watched the subtle hierarchy in their interactions, noticing who spoke with authority, who listened, and who was simply performing their part. It was fascinating and intimidating. As she waited, she felt the familiar knot of nerves in her stomach. She knew that once she played, all eyes would be on her. The polite smiles would fade into focused attention, or perhaps skepticism. She tried to imagine how it would feel to sit on the stage, alone with all these people watching her every move. The thought made her hands tremble slightly, but she held her posture steady. She reminded herself that she had prepared for this. Her music was not just skill, but experience, emotion, and honesty. She could not let fear steal this moment. A few young musicians passed by, chatting casually. They smiled at her, offering small words of encouragement. Their presence was comforting, a reminder that she was not completely alone in this world, but she also knew that when her turn came, it would be just her and the music. No support, no conversation, only her talent and the audience. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, letting herself sink into the quiet confidence she had built over years of practice. She could do this, she told herself. She had done it before. In her small apartment, countless times. And the experience had shaped her into who she was. The announcer called a few names. Each performer walking to the stage, playing their pieces. She watched them, noting the difference between their polished movements and the depth of their music. Some played well, but lacked soul. Others had raw emotion but lacked refinement. She realized that finding balance between skill and emotion was her greatest strength. Her music had both, not because it was flawless, but because it was honest. That honesty was something no amount of money or polish could create. When her name was finally announced, she felt a sudden rush of adrenaline. Her heart leaped, her palms felt damp, and yet there was a spark of excitement she could not ignore. She stood, smoothing her dress, and walked toward the stage. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the room itself was weighing her down. She could hear the polite murmur of the audience, feel the hidden curiosity, even sense the slight doubt lingering in the air. People were watching her closely, measuring her, trying to guess if she belonged. She reminded herself to ignore it, to focus on the music, on the story she wanted to tell through sound. The stage was larger than she expected, with bright lights aimed directly at her. The piano was perfectly polished, its keys gleaming under the light. She sat down, feeling the cool surface beneath her hands, and took a deep breath. The polite smiles from the audience were still there, but now they were faces she could no longer avoid. Some nodded as she adjusted herself. Others whispered quietly, sharing opinions that she could not hear. She felt the anticipation, the quiet judgment, but also a strange sense of liberation. Here, in this room, she could finally let go and play as she always had. Without hiding, her fingers touched the keys softly at first, testing the instrument, feeling the resistance and sound. The first note rang out, delicate, clear, and precise. She closed her eyes, letting the music flow from her heart through her fingers. Each chord carried emotion. Every note told a story of her journey, her struggles, and her victories. The room began to shift imperceptibly, the polite chatter fading as people became aware of the sound filling the space. Some leaned forward slightly, their expressions changing from casual curiosity to focused attention. Her music was beginning to speak in a language no words could replace. She continued to play, moving through her carefully chosen pieces. Some were soft, introspective, like quiet conversations with herself. Others were stronger, filled with determination, capturing the challenges she had faced in life. She played not for applause or recognition, but to convey her truth, the story of a life lived in persistence and passion. The polite smiles in the audience slowly disappeared, replaced by attentive silence. The room felt heavier, not with judgment, but with respect and absorption. She realized that she had begun to command attention, not through force, but through honesty. As the music grew, so did her confidence. Her nerves settled, replaced by a sense of purpose. She could see subtle changes in the audience, the way they shifted in their seats, the way their eyes followed her every movement. The polite whispers had vanished entirely. People were no longer pretending to listen. They were listening. Every note was a bridge between her world and theirs, a connection built without words, without explanation. She felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet joy that her music had the power to touch others in such a way. She played with everything she had, allowing the highs and lows of the pieces to express the complexity of her experiences. The music was not perfect in the technical sense, but it was alive, breathing, and full of honesty. She noticed one elderly man in the front row leaning forward, his eyes wide with fascination. A young woman at the back had tears glistening, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She did not know them, would never know them, but in that moment, they were connected by the music. That connection was what mattered, more than polite smiles or whispered judgments. By the time she finished the last piece, the room was silent, but it was no longer tense. It was a silence full of respect, admiration, and reflection. She allowed the last note to linger, savoring the moment, feeling the impact of her music. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen. Not for her appearance or her social standing, but for her talent and honesty. She had walked into a room where she felt out of place, faced polite scrutiny and hidden doubt, and emerged as someone who commanded attention without asking for it. As she left the stage, she realized that the experience had changed her. She had learned that music could transcend social boundaries. Honesty and passion could reach people regardless of their background. The polite smiles she had noticed at the beginning were still there in the hallway. But now they carried a new weight, a subtle acknowledgement that she had proven herself in a way that could not be ignored. She walked through the room quietly, feeling a sense of accomplishment and quiet pride, knowing that the journey ahead would hold new challenges, but also new opportunities for her music to be heard and appreciated. She sat backstage, taking a moment to steady herself. The applause from the previous performers had been polite, but it was different for her. She could feel the weight of expectation, and it was not just from the audience, it was from herself. She had come this far, faced rooms of doubt, and navigated polite smiles that hid judgment. Now, the moment had arrived where she had to let go completely. She took a deep breath, feeling the familiar tension in her shoulders, and reminded herself that music was her voice. It had always been her voice. Even in the quietest mornings and darkest nights. When the announcer finally called her name, a hush fell over the audience. The polite murmurs faded, replaced by curious glances that quickly turned into fixed attention. She walked to the stage slowly, letting her eyes meet a few of the faces in the front rows. They smiled, but it was a different kind of smile now, one that carried intrigue and expectation. She nodded slightly, acknowledging them, and approached the piano with calm determination. Her hands hovered over the keys for a moment, feeling the texture, the coolness, the promise that each note would carry something of her heart into the room. The first notes she played were soft, almost fragile, like the beginnings of a whispered story. She could hear them too. In the quiet of the audience, a room full of people suddenly alert. She closed her eyes, letting her fingers move instinctively. The music flowed gently at first, careful, measured, and precise. But as she continued, the notes began to take shape into something deeper. Every key she pressed told a part of her life, each melody a reflection of years spent practicing in solitude. Facing small victories and countless disappointments, she felt herself sinking into the music, and with every chord, the audience followed. Whether they realized it or not, slowly, the sound began to fill the room in a way that was impossible to ignore. People shifted in their seats, some leaning forward, others sitting back, absorbing the music without moving a word. It was no longer just a performance. It was a story being told through sound. She played pieces that were gentle, intimate, almost like conversations with herself, then moved into pieces that were more powerful, bold, and determined. The music carried her life with it, the moments of doubt, the long hours alone, the triumphs she had silently celebrated. Her fingers danced across the keys, effortlessly, yet intentionally. Conveying emotion that words could never capture, she could feel the attention changing in the audience. The polite smiles, the initial glances that had felt like judgment, began to fade. They were being replaced by quiet focus, by a realization that what they were hearing was more than music hit, was a life lived with intention, struggle, and passion. She noticed subtle reactions, a hand gripping the edge of a seat, eyes narrowing in concentration, a few heads tilting slightly as if trying to absorb every sound. It was a reaction she had never seen before in her small practice rooms, and it made her heart beat faster, not with fear, but with validation. This was the connection she had been searching for all her life. The music grew in intensity. She allowed herself to become completely absorbed, letting the melody take her wherever it needed to go. Her hands moved fluidly, expressing joy, sorrow, longing, and determination, all in succession. She could feel the room responding in kind, each note reaching further, touching deeper. The initial curiosity had transformed into something more profound: respect and silent admiration. The audience, composed of people who had spent their lives evaluating and judging, could no longer do anything but listen. Her music had taken control, commanding attention not through arrogance, but through authenticity and vulnerability. A few moments stood out in her mind as she played. One was a long, slow chord that stretched across the room like a sigh, resonating with the emotions she had held inside for so long. Another was a rapid, intricate series of notes that spoke of determination and courage, the hours spent honing her craft, of persistence in the face of doubt. She saw people visibly moved, some with tears threatening to spill, others with mouths slightly open in astonishment. It was the kind of reaction that could not be faked, the kind that comes only when something real touches the soul. She felt a quiet pride, but did not let it distract her. She was telling a story, and every note mattered. The room was transformed, though no one said a word. The air felt different, as if the walls themselves were absorbing the music and letting it echo back. People who had initially judged her, who had smiled politely without real thought, were now fully engaged. They were no longer polite observers, they were participants, their emotions tied to the rise and fall of her melodies. She could feel the collective energy of the audience, a tangible presence that encouraged her to pour more of herself into the performance. She had never experienced this before, and yet it felt natural, as if she had always been meant to play for such a moment. Her music moved seamlessly from gentle to forceful, from introspective to celebratory. She allowed herself to explore every emotion she had ever felt, every experience she had ever lived. The room responded in silence, but she knew the impact of each note. There were moments when she could almost feel the thoughts of the audience aligning with her own. When the experience became shared without a single word being exchanged, that was the power she had always believed music held, and now she saw it manifest before her eyes. Time seemed to blur. She lost herself in the music, and in doing so, the audience lost track of everything else. There were no distractions, no polite whispers, no judgment, only presence and attention. Every note she played was a bridge, connecting her life to the lives of those who listened. She could sense their emotions shifting, could feel them moving with her, breathing with her, living through the music. It was as though the room had become a living entity, shaped by the sound of her fingers on the keys. She played a piece that had always been her favorite, one she had practiced for years in her quiet apartment. It was a melody that carried hope and resilience, a reflection of the journey she had taken to reach this point. The notes rose and fell, delicate and strong, and she felt a wave of emotion rise within her. The audience reacted subtly but unmistakably. There were nods, tears, and unspoken acknowledgement. The polite smiles that had greeted her arrival were gone, replaced by genuine engagement and respect. She realized then that she had succeeded not by seeking approval, but by being true to herself and her music. As she reached the final segment of her performance, she allowed the music to slow, to linger, to breathe. Every chord was deliberate, every pause meaningful. She wanted the audience to feel the journey, to understand the story she had woven through sound. Her fingers hovered on the last keys, and then she let the final note ring out, holding it until it faded into silence. The room remained still, almost reverently, as if the air itself was reluctant to break the spell. She sat quietly for a moment, letting the silence speak, feeling the weight of what had just occurred. She had stepped into a world where she was not expected to belong, and yet she had commanded attention and respect without asking for it. When she finally stood and walked off the stage, she felt a mixture of relief and exhilaration. Her heart was racing. It was not fear, it was the satisfaction of knowing that she had shared herself completely and honestly. The audience slowly began to respond, clapping first gently, then with growing enthusiasm. She could hear cheers and whispers of admiration, but she did not focus on them. She had already received the recognition she truly wanted, not from applause, but from the connection she had forged through her music. She had stepped into a room of polite smiles and hidden judgment and emerged as someone who could speak without words, who could move hearts with honesty and talent. The moment she began playing, the room transformed. What had been polite curiosity became complete focus. Every eye, every ear, every subtle movement of the audience shifted toward her. It's not out of expectation, but out of fascination. She had entered the space unsure, anxious about whether her music would matter to these people who had seen so much, judged so quickly, and smiled politely without real engagement. But now, with her first notes, she commanded attention not with words or presence, but with the truth in her music. The melody she played was deep and rich, a reflection of her life, her struggles, and her perseverance. It began softly, a gentle invitation that seemed to touch the edges of the room. She could feel the air change around her as if the walls themselves had leaned in to listen. The audience no longer shifted impatiently, no longer whispered. All polite murmurs were gone. Every listener had been drawn into her world, caught by the sincerity and depth of her sound. The music was alive. Not just notes on a page, but an extension of her soul. Her fingers moved with a confidence that had grown over years of quiet practice. Of nights spent playing alone when no one could hear. Of mornings filled with dreams she did not dare to share. The rhythm and flow of her pieces carried the audience along, from soft, contemplative moments to crescendos full of emotion and energy. Each chord told a story. Each note conveyed a feeling she had carried for years. She did not need to speak. The music spoke for her. She could feel it connecting her to the people in the room, forming an invisible bridge between their world and hers. At first, some in the audience tried to hide their amazement, their polite habit of smiling while withholding real emotion, but the power of her performance was undeniable. Eyes widened, heads tilted, hands tightened in laps or on armrests. She noticed subtle reactions, a furrowed brow, a quick intake of breath, a tear glistening in someone's eye. These were not gestures of polite attention. They were signs that her music had pierced through the barriers, had reached them at a human level. She smiled faintly, though no one could see it. She did not play for recognition. But knowing that her truth was reaching others gave her an unexpected warmth. The melody grew stronger, more commanding, yet never harsh. It carried the weight of her experiences, from moments of quiet reflection to bursts of determination. She allowed herself to fully feel what she played, letting every note become a reflection of her heart. The audience absorbed it, completely silent, captivated in a way she had only dreamed of. Their polite facades had fallen away, replaced by genuine emotion. People who had smiled out of habit now sat leaning forward, attentive and engaged. She could feel their surprise, their awe, and it fueled her performance. Letting her music reach even further, she moved through the pieces seamlessly, blending gentle melodies with strong, expressive sequences. The softer moments were intimate, almost like a conversation between her and the audience, while the louder parts were declarations of resilience, strength, and passion. It was not just technical skill on display. It was emotion, experience, and vulnerability. She could feel the room responding with her, the energy flowing back and forth, invisible yet tangible. The music was no longer hers alone. It had become a shared experience, connection that words could never capture. There were moments when she allowed silence to hang between notes, letting the echoes fill the room. She knew that these pauses were as important as the music itself. They gave the audience a chance to breathe, to reflect, to feel the weight of what they were hearing. Each pause was deliberate, a moment to emphasize the emotions carried in the previous measures. She could sense the anticipation building, the focus intensifying, and it drove her to continue pouring everything she had into her performance. She noticed individuals in the audience reacting in ways she could not have imagined. An elderly man sat motionless, eyes fixed, absorbing every note. A young woman leaned forward, tears forming as the music seemed to resonate with experiences she could not put into words. Even those who had seemed indifferent at first were now fully engaged, their attention captured completely by the depth and honesty of the performance. The polite smiles that had greeted her at the beginning were gone. They had been replaced by admiration, respect, and awe. The music built to a crescendo, powerful and unrelenting yet controlled, a testament to her years of dedication and practice. She allowed herself to feel the intensity, letting it guide her fingers across the keys, creating a sound that filled the entire room. Every chord struck with purpose. Every note flowed naturally from her heart. The audience sat in silent reverence, unable to interrupt or even speak. Her music had silenced them, not by force, but by truth. The connection between her and the listeners was complete, unbroken, and undeniable as the final pieces of her performance approached. She softened the notes, allowing the intensity to fade gently, leaving behind a lingering emotion. The last chord was held long, reverberating through the room, echoing in a way that felt almost sacred. She let it resonate fully, knowing that its impact would last even after the sound had disappeared. When the note finally faded, the silence that followed was profound, almost as if the audience was hesitant to break the spell that had been cast. She remained at the piano for a moment longer, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of what had just occurred. She had entered the room uncertain, unsure of how her music would be received. She had faced polite smiles, whispered judgments, and invisible walls of skepticism. Yet, through the power of her honesty and talent, she had commanded attention, moved hearts, and created an atmosphere of genuine emotion and respect. She realized then that true music, performed with sincerity, had the ability to reach even the most guarded hearts. When she finally stood and walked off the stage, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her heart was racing, but not from fear. It was from the intensity of the connection she had forged. People in the audience began to stir, some clapping tentatively, others still silent, overwhelmed by what they had just experienced. Their polite smiles had transformed into genuine expressions of admiration and respect. She knew that she had made an impact, not through force or persuasion, but through the undeniable power of her music. Backstage, she sat quietly, letting herself absorb the moment. The experience had been transformative, not just for the audience, but for herself. She had faced her doubts, her fears, and her insecurities, and had allowed her true self to be heard. The polite faces, once intimidating and distant, had been replaced by a room full of people who had been moved by her talent and honesty. She felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that she had spoken through music, without words, and had been understood. It was a moment she would carry with her forever, a testament to the power of perseverance, passion, and authenticity. As she left the building later that evening, the city felt different. The streets, the lights, the familiar sounds, all seemed to hold a new possibility. She had faced a world that had seemed intimidating and distant, and had emerged not just as a performer, but as someone who could connect, inspire, and leave a lasting impact through the universal language of music. The night air was cool and refreshing, and she walked with a sense of pride and quiet confidence, knowing that her journey had only just begun, but that she had already proven to herself that her voice, her music could truly be heard. She walked off the stage feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The applause from the audience was thunderous, yet she did not focus on it immediately. Instead, she let herself breathe, allowing her body to relax after the intensity of the performance. The music had been more than notes. It had been her heart and soul shared openly, and now she could finally feel the relief of having done it. The polite smiles that had greeted her earlier were gone, replaced by genuine admiration. She noticed the subtle nods, the lingering glances, and the way people seemed almost reluctant to leave their seats. For the first time, she felt the real power of her talent, how it could touch people without any words. As she made her way backstage, a few people approached her hesitantly, unsure how to express their admiration. One older man, who had seemed skeptical at first, extended his hand with a warm smile, his eyes shining with emotion. He spoke words of genuine praise, acknowledging the depth and honesty of her music. She listened, grateful, feeling that his appreciation was sincere, not just polite. Another young woman stepped forward, her eyes wet with tears, telling her how much the performance had moved her. Each compliment, each expression of respect, filled her with a quiet joy she had never known. It was different from any applause. It was recognition that went deeper than surface gestures, an understanding that came from true connection. She wandered through the halls, people still watching her, still impressed by what they had witnessed. The polite chatter that had filled the room earlier was now replaced by genuine discussions about the performance, about the emotion and skill she had displayed. Conversations that had seemed shallow or distant now carried real admiration and fascination. She realized that her music had done what she had always hoped. It had bridged a gap, connected to worlds, and made her presence undeniable. She did not need to speak. Her music had spoken for her in the most powerful way, in the quiet moments between interactions. She reflected on how far she had come. From the small apartment where she had practiced for years, to this grand hall filled with people who had once seemed untouchable. She had journeyed through doubt, fear, and uncertainty. She thought about all the times she had played alone, the moments of frustration and triumph, the nights when she had questioned whether anyone would ever listen. And now, she understood that all of it had led to this moment. Her dedication, her honesty, and her willingness to take a risk had brought her to a place where her music could be truly heard and appreciated. As the evening continued, she noticed the audience gradually dispersing, but many lingered near the stage, hoping to catch a few words from her or simply to witness her presence once more. She spoke quietly to those who approached, graciously accepting praise and responding with humility. She did not seek attention or admiration. She simply shared herself and allowed others to respond naturally. The experience had taught her that true respect could not be demanded, could only be earned, and she had earned it through honesty and talent. She found a quiet corner and sat down for a moment, letting herself absorb the impact of the evening. The energy of the room, the emotions she had felt and seen in others, and the profound silence that had followed her final note all lingered in her mind. She realized that this performance had not just been about showcasing her skill, but about sharing a piece of herself, about connecting with others on a human level. It was a lesson she would carry forward, that the most powerful expression of talent is one that is sincere, unguarded, true to oneself. As she prepared to leave the building, she felt a sense of calm and fulfillment. The night had been transformative, not just for the audience, but for her as well. She had faced her fears, embraced vulnerability, and allowed her music to lead. The polite smiles, the whispered judgments, and the initial uncertainty of the room had all been replaced by genuine admiration and respect. She walked through the streets, feeling the cool night air, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here and the possibilities that lay ahead. She knew that this was only the beginning, that there would be other rooms, other audiences, and other challenges. But she also knew that she had found a voice that could carry her through them. She thought about the people that she had seen that night, the way their expressions had changed, and the subtle ways in which her music had reached them. It was a reminder that true talent does not require approval or validation to exist. It only requires honesty, persistence, and courage. She had taken a risk by stepping into a world that had seemed distant and intimidating. And in doing so, she had proven not only to the audience but also to herself that her music had power. It could move hearts, bridge gaps, and leave a lasting impression. The journey home was quiet, but her mind was full of reflection. She thought about the smiles that were no longer polite but genuine, the whispered compliments, the tears she had seen, and the respect she had earned without even asking for it. The evening had confirmed something she had always believed but had rarely experienced fully, that authenticity in art could touch anyone regardless of their background, wealth, or status. Her music had been a voice, a story, and a bridge. And it had been heard clearly. Back in her apartment, she placed her instrument in its usual spot and sat quietly for a moment. The room was familiar, comforting, and unchanged, yet she felt different. She had stepped into a world of doubt and polite smiles and emerged as someone whose talent could not be ignored. She realized that the journey of a musician, or any artist, was not about seeking recognition, but about being brave enough to share oneself fully. That evening had been proof that honesty, persistence, and courage could create connections that were deeper and more meaningful than any applause or polite acknowledgement. She allowed herself to feel a quiet sense of pride and fulfillment. The elite had smiled politely at her arrival, perhaps expecting nothing, but they had left changed by her music. She did not dwell on their initial judgments. Instead, she focused on the truth of what she had shared and the way it had resonated. That experience, she knew, would shape her future performances, giving her the confidence to continue expressing herself fully and fearless in the following days. She received messages from a few people who had been at the event, expressing their admiration and gratitude for the performance. Each message reminded her that her music had not only been heard, but had left a lasting impression. She responded with humility and gratitude, knowing that the most important connection had already been made in the moment itself. The experience reinforced her understanding that art, when shared with honesty and courage, could transcend boundaries and speak directly to the hearts of others. As time passed, she continued to practice, to compose, and to share her music. Carrying with her the memory of that transformative night, she knew that there would be other stages, other audiences, and other moments of doubt. But she also knew that she had found her voice and learned the power of sharing it authentically. The journey of an artist was ongoing, filled with challenges and triumphs, but she faced it now with confidence, knowing that her music could touch lives, change perspectives, and leave a lasting impact in her quiet moments. She often thought back to the polite smiles she had encountered at the beginning, recalling the subtle doubt and curiosity in the room, and she smiled not with triumph, but with gratitude. Those smiles had been the backdrop against which her music had shined. The transformation that had taken place was a reminder of the power of honesty, dedication, and courage. She had entered the world uncertain and left with a profound understanding of her own strength, and the knowledge that music, when played with truth, could indeed silence doubt and speak directly to the human heart. For days, she thought about refusing. She imagined herself walking into a grand hall full of strangers who would smile politely, then whisper behind her back, thinking she did not belong. Memories of past failures and the times she had been overlooked came rushing back. She almost put the letter away, convincing herself that her music could remain in her small apartment, safe from judgment. But there was a quiet voice inside her, persistent and insistent, telling her to try. This was not just an opportunity. It was a chance to see if her music could speak beyond the walls she had known all her life. Finally, she decided to prepare. She spent hours selecting pieces that represented her journey. Some were soft and gentle, others were filled with strength and determination. She practiced tirelessly, not for perfection, but to pour her emotions into every note. Her neighbors sometimes paused to listen, wondering what had changed in her music. Even the small cats that wandered past her window seemed to linger, as if they understood that something important was coming. The days before the event were filled with mixed emotions. Excitement danced with fear. She imagined the moment she would walk into the room and see rows of unfamiliar faces staring at her. She wondered if anyone would see her story through her music or dismiss it as just another performance. She thought about all the times she had hidden her talent, all the nights she had stayed up playing alone, wondering if it meant anything. And now, she was about to share it with people who might never understand her world. On the morning of the event, she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her simple dress. It was modest but elegant enough to feel confident. She had never cared much for appearances, but she knew that in that room, first impressions mattered. She practiced breathing exercises, trying to calm the storm of thoughts in her mind. With each deep breath, she reminded herself that her music was enough. Her talent was not defined by who listened, but by the honesty she put into every note. The journey to the venue was quiet. The city seemed different that day. The usual noise and chaos softened by the weight of what was to come. She felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness with each step closer. When she arrived, the building loomed large and intimidating, its polished marble and towering doors a stark contrast to the small spaces she was used to. She paused for a moment outside, taking it all in, feeling small and unsure. But she did not turn back. Inside, the atmosphere was unlike anything she had ever experienced. People moved gracefully, talking in low, measured tones. Waiters glided past with trays of drinks she could hardly name. Every corner was polished, every detail deliberate. She felt the weight of expectation pressing down on her. People smiled at her as she walked past, polite but distant, their eyes scanning her quickly before returning to their conversations. It was clear she was not one of them, and she felt the old pang of doubt creeping back in. But she reminded herself why she was there. Her music was her voice, and tonight it would speak. Backstage, she found the instrument she would play. It was familiar yet foreign, a reminder that she was stepping into a new world. She closed her eyes and let her hands hover over the keys, feeling the connection she had cultivated over years of practice. She remembered the quiet mornings, the long nights, the small victories, and the setbacks. All of it led to this moment. She allowed herself to feel the fear, then let it go, letting the music rise within her before it even reached the instrument. As the announcer called her name, she took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The polite smiles and subtle glances were exactly as she had imagined. She could feel the judgment, the curiosity, the hidden skepticism in the air, but she did not let it stop her. She sat down, adjusted her posture, and placed her fingers on the keys. The first note sounded soft and deliberate, carrying with it the weight of her journey. She closed her eyes and let the music flow, each note a story, each chord a confession. The audience shifted uncomfortably at first. Some whispered, some glanced around, unsure how to react. But slowly, something changed. The sound filled the room, delicate yet powerful. Her music began to tell a story that words could not capture. She felt every eye on her, not with the polite distance of before, but with a tension that was growing, deepening. She played with her heart exposed, letting the years of practice and perseverance shine through. For the first time, she felt that her music was not just heard, but understood. When she finished, the silence that followed was heavy, almost reverent. She had shared herself without pretense, without expectation, and the room had responded in a way that no polite smile could ever capture. For a moment, she simply sat there, letting the stillness wash over her, feeling a quiet satisfaction she had never known. She had taken a step into a world that seemed distant and intimidating, and she had not faltered. She had let her music speak, and in doing so, she had spoken for herself. That night, as she left the venue, the city seemed different. The streets felt smaller, closer, as if the world,